The moment Serafina De Luca walked into the Rossi Imperial Tower wearing that blood-red gown, she became a target. Roman Vescari, tattooed king of Milan's criminal underworld, stood across the ballroom watching the woman he couldn't afford to love descend into enemy territory. And for the first time in 15 years, the most dangerous man in Italy felt genuine fear. Not for himself, for her. Because his rival Luciano Morelli had just turned Serafina into the perfect weapon. And tonight, in a room full of predators wearing expensive suits, someone was going to bleed. If you want to see how this story ends, stick around until the final word, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The Rossi Imperial Tower didn't just dominate Milan's skyline, it swallowed it whole. 73 floors of steel and glass that caught the sunset like a blade, built by Luciano Morelli's grandfather back when the family still bothered pretending their fortune came from silk trading instead of heroin routes. Tonight, the 22nd floor ballroom glittered with the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars. Marble floors imported from quarries that no longer existed. Champagne at 400 euros per bottle being consumed like tap water. Politicians mingled with gallery owners. Crime financiers shook hands with socialites who knew better than to ask questions. Everyone smiled. Everyone performed. And beneath the performance, leverage changed hands in whispers and handshakes that looked casual but carried consequences measured in bodies and bank accounts. Roman Vescari stood near the western panoramic window with bourbon he hadn't touched in 45 minutes. The charcoal suit was tailored so precisely it almost disguised the violence coiled beneath the fabric. Almost. The ink crawling up his throat and disappearing under his collar told a different story. Black lines that looked like abstract art from a distance, but resolved into something darker up close. Dates, coordinates, names of men who'd betrayed him and stopped breathing shortly after. He was 37 but looked older in the eyes. The kind of older that came from watching people die and being the reason why. Dante Ricci materialized beside him without making a sound, which was impressive for a man built like he'd been carved from concrete. Dante had been Roman's second-in-command since they were 17 and running protection schemes in the Navigli district, back when their biggest problem was dodging police instead of owning half of them. Luciano's working the room like he's campaigning, Dante murmured, eyes scanning the crowd with the efficiency of someone who'd survived 3 assassination attempts by paying attention. Shaking hands, playing the gracious host. He might as well be running for office, Roman said quietly. He's got enough councilmen on payroll. You've got the other half. Roman didn't smile. Smiling implied comfort, and comfortable men ended up dead in his world. Movement on the Calabrian shipment? Roman asked. Delayed. Port inspections tightened up after that journalist started digging into dock operations. Buy her off. Tried. She's not interested in money. Then make her interested in something else. Scandal. Promotion. Redirect her attention before she connects dots that get people killed. Dante nodded, then hesitated. You sure you want to be here tonight? This is Luciano's territory. That's a statement. I know what it is. Then why? Because if I don't show, he interprets weakness, Roman said. And the second Luciano Morelli smells weakness, he starts testing boundaries we can't afford tested. What Roman didn't say, what he wouldn't say even to Dante, was that Luciano had already started testing boundaries 3 weeks ago. That's when Roman discovered Serafina De Luca had received a personal invitation to tonight's gala. Serafina, who owned a small art gallery in the Brera district and had no business anywhere near organized crime. Serafina, whose name appeared near the top of a confidential analysis Roman's intelligence team had compiled 6 months back, a document listing people capable of emotionally compromising him. A document that had been stolen from Roman's private server 8 weeks ago. Roman had called her the day he found out. Don't go, he'd said without preamble. Excuse me? Her voice carried that particular edge she used when men tried giving her orders. The gala, Morelli's event, don't go. I don't take orders from you, Roman. I'm not giving orders. I'm trying to keep you breathing. Silence stretched between them like piano wire. You don't get to decide what risks I take, she said finally. Serafina, I was invited because someone appreciated my gallery work. That's all. No, Roman said quietly. You were invited because Luciano knows exactly who you are to me. And who am I to you? The question landed like a knife between his ribs. Roman hadn't answered. He just said, "Please don't go," and disconnected. She went anyway. Now Roman stood in Luciano's ballroom cataloging exit routes and sightlines while his chest felt like someone had replaced his lungs with broken glass. The grand staircase doors opened. Every conversation in the room died simultaneously. Roman turned toward the entrance and felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Serafina descended the marble stairs in a gown the color of arterial blood. The fabric moved like liquid silk, clinging to her body with the kind of precision that suggested either an extremely expensive designer or psychological warfare disguised as fashion. Her dark hair fell past her shoulders in waves that caught the chandelier light. No jewelry except diamond earrings that sparkled every time she moved her head. She didn't smile, didn't perform, just walked down those stairs like she'd been born in ballrooms instead of the working-class neighborhood where Roman knew she'd actually grown up. Cameras exploded, men stared, women immediately began calculating. The dress, the posture, the threat assessment. And across the ballroom, Luciano Morelli watched everything with a smile that made Roman's hands curl into fists. Luciano stood near the orchestra platform in a white dinner jacket that screamed old money and new arrogance. Handsome in that classical Italian way, sharp cheekbones, dark, intelligent eyes, silver threading through his hair at the temples. He looked like he belonged in fashion editorials instead of managing narcotics distribution through northern Italy. But Roman knew better. Beneath the elegance, Luciano was pure calculation, every smile measured, every gesture strategic. He didn't explode like the younger bosses scrambling for territory in the southern districts. He positioned, maneuvered, waited for enemies to make mistakes, and then buried them with their own momentum. Tonight, he'd positioned Serafina De Luca as the centerpiece of whatever game he was playing. Roman forced himself to look away, forced his expression into neutrality. He lifted the bourbon to his lips and tasted smoke and failure. "Christ," Dante breathed, "is that—" "Don't." "Roman, if Luciano's using her as bait, I know what he's doing. Then we extract her, now, before—" "We do nothing," Roman interrupted, voice dropping to something cold and final. "We watch, we wait, and we don't give Luciano the reaction he's fishing for." But even as the words left his mouth, Roman knew he was lying to both of them, because the second Serafina appeared in that dress inside enemy territory, the game had begun. And Roman Vescari, the man who'd built an empire on discipline and emotional restraint, suddenly wasn't sure he could play it smart. Serafina moved through the ballroom with confidence that looked effortless and cost her everything. Inside, her pulse hammered. Her palms felt slick despite the lotion she'd applied an hour ago. Every instinct screamed she'd made a catastrophic mistake coming here. But she kept her spine straight and her expression calm because that's what you did when you grew up poor in a city that ate weakness for breakfast. You learned to wear confidence like armor even when you felt naked. A waiter appeared with champagne. She took a glass just to give her hand something to do. "Serafina De Luca." The voice came from her left, smooth as expensive whiskey. She turned. Luciano Morelli stood there looking like every warning her mother had ever given her about men who smiled too easily. Tall, well-dressed, eyes that probably made women stupid. "Luciano," she said evenly, "thank you for the invitation." "The pleasure is entirely mine." He gestured toward the ballroom. "Are you enjoying the party?" "It's beautiful. Excessive, but beautiful." He laughed. "You're more honest than most of my guests." "Most of your guests are probably trying to get something from you." "And you're not?" "I run an art gallery," Serafina said, "not a lobbying firm." "I've seen your work, the exhibition last spring, the one featuring emerging Italian photographers. Quite impressive." She studied him carefully. Men like Luciano didn't attend small gallery openings unless they had reasons that had nothing to do with art appreciation. "You were there?" she asked. "Briefly. I don't pretend to understand contemporary photography, but I recognize talent when I see it." "Is that why you invited me tonight?" "Partially." His smile shifted into something harder to read. "I also thought you might enjoy seeing a different side of Milan's cultural landscape." "Cultural landscape?" as if this ballroom full of criminals and compromised politicians represented culture instead of carefully organized corruption. That's kind of you, Serafina said neutrally. Walk with me, Luciano said. I'd like to introduce you to some people who might be interested in your gallery. She recognized the request for what it was. Not an invitation, but a test. Refuse and insult her host. Accept and step deeper into whatever game was being played. She chose the third option. I'd rather get my bearings first, she said with a polite smile. Beautiful as this is, it's a bit overwhelming. Luciano's eyes flickered with something that might have been approval or irritation. Hard to tell. Of course, he said smoothly. Enjoy yourself. We'll speak later. He disappeared into the crowd with the fluid grace of someone who owned every room he entered. Serafina exhaled slowly and took a sip of champagne that tasted like expensive regret. Across the ballroom, she could feel Roman watching her. She didn't look in his direction. Looking would acknowledge the connection, and acknowledging the connection was exactly what Luciano wanted. Instead, she drifted toward a group of gallery owners discussing an upcoming auction. She listened, smiled when appropriate, contributed intelligent observations about market trends and artist valuations, played the part of the small business owner grateful for access to wealth and influence. But her awareness stayed locked on Roman's position near the western window. She'd met him 8 months ago at a fundraiser for emerging artists. He'd shown up alone, spent 30 minutes studying the pieces without speaking to anyone, then bid aggressively on a photograph by an unknown artist from Palermo. Paid 3 times its estimated value. Afterward, she'd approached him, curious. That was generous, she'd said. It was good work. You could have gotten it cheaper. I wanted the artist to know the piece had value. That had surprised her. Men like Roman, men whose reputations preceded them like smoke before fire, weren't supposed to care about encouraging young artists. They talked for 20 minutes about photography, art markets, the death of small galleries in gentrifying neighborhoods. He'd been intelligent, surprisingly thoughtful, completely uninterested in performing charm. When he left, he'd given her his card and said, "If you ever need gallery security improved, call me." She'd laughed. "I can't afford your security." First consultation's free. She'd called 3 weeks later after someone broke into her gallery overnight and destroyed 2 installations. Roman's people had upgraded her alarm system, installed cameras, and ensured the vandalism stopped immediately. She'd tried to pay him. He'd refused. "Consider it an investment in culture," he'd said. That should have been the end of it. Instead, they kept running into each other. Gallery openings, coffee shops in the Brera district, chance meetings that stopped feeling like chance after the 4th time. They'd talk. Not about his work. Not about crime or violence or the rumors that followed him like shadows. They talked about art, music, the way Milan changed when tourists flooded in every summer. Small things that felt enormous because they were real. 6 months ago, after an opening where she'd sold 3 pieces to a collector from Amsterdam, Roman had walked her home through the quiet streets. At her door, he'd stopped and looked at her like he was trying to solve an equation he couldn't quite balance. "I'm not good for you," he'd said quietly. "I didn't ask you to be." "Serafina, you're not responsible for deciding what's good for me, Roman." He'd looked at her for a long moment, something painful moving behind his eyes. Then he'd left without another word. They hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, until the phone call warning her not to come tonight. Now she stood in Luciano Morelli's ballroom wearing a dress she'd bought specifically because she knew Roman would be here, and she couldn't decide if that made her brave or catastrophically stupid. The night deepened. Serafina moved through conversations with politicians' wives and art collectors who smiled too much. She accepted business cards from people whose money probably came from sources she didn't want to investigate. She played the role perfectly, the ambitious gallery owner grateful for access to Milan's elite. But every 20 minutes, she clocked Roman's position. He moved through the ballroom with surgical precision, maintaining sight lines, controlling angles, never looking directly at her, but somehow always aware of exactly where she stood. His people noticed. She watched Dante intercept him twice, leaning in to murmur something that made Roman's jaw tighten. Luciano noticed too. That was the point, she realized. This entire evening, the invitation, the gala, her presence here, it was designed to provoke Roman into revealing something, some weakness, some leverage Luciano could exploit. and she'd walked right into it wearing a crimson dress and diamond earrings. Near 11 o'clock, Serafina excused herself from a conversation about Venetian glass sculptures and headed toward the bathroom corridor. The hallway outside the ballroom was quieter, dimmer. Gold wall sconces cast warm light across burgundy carpets that probably cost more than her annual gallery revenue. She found the bathroom and locked herself in one of the marble stalls, pressing her palms against her temples and breathing carefully. This was a mistake. Roman had been right. She should have stayed home, should have declined the invitation, should have trusted that men like Luciano Morelli didn't invite small gallery owners to exclusive galas out of genuine interest in art. But she'd come anyway because some stubborn part of her refused to let Roman Viscari decide what risks she could take. And now she was trapped in a ballroom full of criminals playing games she didn't understand, with stakes she couldn't calculate. She emerged from the stall and washed her hands, studying herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back appeared confident, composed, in control. All lies. Serafina dried her hands and headed back toward the ballroom. Luciano intercepted her halfway down the corridor. He appeared from a side hallway so smoothly it felt choreographed. "Leaving so soon?" he asked. "Just needed air," Serafina said carefully. "It does get warm in there." He stepped closer. Not threatening exactly, but close enough to shift the dynamic. "I wanted to apologize if I made you uncomfortable earlier. That wasn't my intention." "You didn't." "Good." He smiled. "Because I genuinely do admire your work. The gallery, the artists you support. It's rare to find someone operating with actual integrity in this city." "Flattery isn't necessary, Luciano. I'm already here." His smile widened. "Direct. I appreciate that." "What do you want?" Serafina asked bluntly. "Want? Men like you don't invite women like me to events like this without wanting something." Luciano studied her for a long moment, something calculating moving behind his eyes. "You're right," he said finally. "I do want something." "Which is?" "Information." "About?" "Roman Viscari." There it was. The truth finally surfacing like a body weighted incorrectly. Serafina's pulse spiked, but she kept her expression neutral. "I don't know what you think I can tell you about Roman." "Don't you?" "We're acquaintances. He donated to my gallery once. That's all." "That's all," Luciano repeated softly. "Interesting. Because Roman doesn't donate to anything unless it serves a strategic purpose." "Maybe he likes art." "Maybe." Luciano's smile turned cold. "Or maybe he likes you." "This conversation is over," Serafina said, moving to step past him. Luciano didn't block her physically, but his voice stopped her anyway. "Roman doesn't protect people, Serafina. He protects ownership." She turned back slowly. "You think you're special," Luciano continued quietly. "You think whatever connection you have with him is real. But Roman Viscari doesn't do real. He does strategic. Everything he touches serves a purpose, including you." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Luciano stepped closer. 6 months ago, Roman had his analysts compile a list of people who could be used as leverage against him. Emotional vulnerabilities, family, trusted allies. Your name was near the top of that list. Serafina's chest tightened. "How do you—" "Because I have the file," Luciano said simply. "Stolen from Roman's private server 2 months ago. And your name is right there in black and white. Serafina De Luca, gallery owner. Potential emotional compromise." The hallway felt like it was tilting. "So when you think Roman cares about you," Luciano said softly, "remember that he documented you as a weakness to be managed, not a person to be protected, a variable to be controlled." Serafina's hands curled into fists. Before she could respond, the temperature in the corridor dropped 10 degrees. Roman appeared at the far end of the hallway like a storm condensing into human form. He didn't run, didn't shout, just walked toward them with terrible purpose while Luciano's bodyguards materialized from side corridors. "Leave," Roman said to Luciano, voice flat and final. "We're just talking," Luciano said pleasantly. "No, you're leaving." Luciano studied Roman for a long moment, then smiled. "Of course. Serafina, it was lovely meeting you. I hope we'll speak again soon." He disappeared down the corridor with his guards, leaving Roman and Serafina alone in the dim golden light. Roman looked at her with something far more dangerous than anger written across his face. Fear. Raw, undisguised fear. Not for himself. For her. "What did he say to you?" Roman asked quietly. "The truth, apparently." Serafina's voice came out harder than she intended. "About the list. The file. Me being documented as a potential emotional compromise." Roman's jaw tightened. "Serafina, is it true?" Silence stretched between them like a chasm opening. "Yes," Roman said finally. The admission hit her like a physical blow. "Jesus Christ, Roman." "It was strategic documentation," he said carefully. "Analysis of potential vulnerabilities across my organization. Everyone gets assessed. Family, allies, anyone who could be used as leverage. And I made the list near the top." "Wonderful," Serafina laughed bitterly. "So what am I, exactly? An asset? A liability? A variable to be managed? You're—" Roman stopped. Started again. "You're someone I can't afford to lose." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I've got." Serafina stared at him, at the tattoos crawling up his throat, at the storm-gray eyes that had terrified men across Italy, but right now looked completely defenseless. "I came tonight because I make my own choices," she said quietly. "But the dress—" She hesitated. "The dress was partly because I knew you'd be here." Roman looked at her like she'd just reached inside his chest with bare hands. "You don't belong to me," he said carefully, every word costing him something. "And I'm finally starting to understand that. And if I stay exactly as I am, then I learn how to love you without turning you into something I control." The word love hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Roman stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with bourbon. "I documented you as a vulnerability because that's what you are," he said quietly. "The only person in this city who makes me feel like maybe I'm not just the violence I've committed. And that terrifies me more than any rival organization ever could." Serafina's throat tightened. "Roman, Gio, let me get you out of here," he said. "Please." She nodded. They walked through the service corridor toward the west exit, where Roman's people had cars waiting. Neither of them spoke. The silence felt heavy with things neither knew how to say. Behind them, Luciano Morelli watched from a security camera feed in his private office and smiled. The game was progressing exactly as planned. Roman's driver pulled up to the west exit. A black Mercedes with bulletproof glass, and a man behind the wheel who'd killed people for significantly less than Roman paid him. Roman opened the back door for Serafina. She paused before getting in. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "Whatever Luciano's planning, I know. He's using me against you." "I know that too." "Then what are you going to do?" Roman looked at her for a long moment, something dark and determined settling behind his eyes. "Whatever it takes," he said simply. Serafina climbed into the Mercedes. Roman slid in beside her, and the door closed with the heavy thunk of German engineering designed to stop bullets. The car pulled away from the Rossi Imperial Tower, leaving the Gala behind in a blur of lights and champagne and carefully concealed threats. Inside the vehicle, Roman pulled out his phone and sent a single text to Dante. "Initiate full surveillance on Morelli. Every asset, every movement. I want to know when he breathes." Then he looked at Serafina in the dim interior light. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what?" "For putting you on that list. For not being honest about what you mean to me. For being so goddamn broken that I document feelings instead of just having them." Serafina studied him. This man built from violence and control who looked like he was barely holding himself together. "You're not broken, Roman," she said softly. "You're just scared. Terrified," he admitted. "Of what?" "That loving you is going to get you killed." The confession hung between them while Milan blurred past the windows, and the driver navigated toward Serafina's apartment in the Brera district. She reached across the seat and took Roman's hand. His fingers closed around hers like she was the only thing keeping him anchored to the world. And somewhere across the city, in the Rossi Imperial Tower, Luciano Morelli poured himself expensive scotch and began planning his next move. Because tonight wasn't the endgame. Tonight was just the opening salvo. And before this was finished, someone was going to bleed. The Mercedes stopped outside Serafina's building. a converted warehouse with art studios on the lower floors and small apartments above. Roman walked her to the entrance, his people maintaining positions on the street with the casual efficiency of soldiers who'd done this 1,000 times. At her door, Serafina turned to face him. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now I make sure Luciano understands you're not a piece on his chessboard." "And how do you do that, T?" Roman's expression went cold and final. "By reminding him what happens to people who threaten things I care about." "Roman, go inside," he said gently. "Lock your door. My people will be watching the building tonight." "You can't just—" "Serafina." He touched her face carefully, like she was something precious he didn't quite know how to hold. "Please, let me do what I'm good at." She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that violence wasn't the answer, that there had to be another way, that escalating would only make things worse. But she'd grown up in this city. She knew how this world worked, so she just nodded and went inside. Roman waited until he heard the lock engage. Then he walked back to the Mercedes, where Dante waited with a tablet displaying real-time surveillance feeds from 6 different angles around Serafina's building. "Security's in place," Dante said. 4-man rotation. Nobody gets within 50 meters without us knowing." "Good." Roman climbed into the car. "Now get me everything on Luciano's movements over the past 3 months. Financial transactions, property acquisitions, shell companies. I want to know every corner of his operation." "You're going after him." "I'm going to bury him," Roman said quietly. "But I'm going to do it so completely that he never even thinks about using her as leverage again." The Mercedes pulled away from the curb, carrying Roman back toward his headquarters in the financial district. Behind them, watching from her 4th-floor window, Serafina stood in the darkness and wondered if she'd just made the most dangerous decision of her life. Not coming to the gala, not wearing that crimson dress, not confronting Luciano in the corridor, but falling in love with Roman Vescari. Because men like Roman didn't love safely. They loved with the same intensity they brought to everything else. Absolute, consuming, and terrifyingly final. And somewhere in the machinery of Milan's criminal underworld, gears had started turning that couldn't be stopped. Luciano had made his opening move. Roman was preparing his response. And Serafina stood at the center of a game that was about to turn lethal. The night deepened. Milan glittered beneath her window like a city built from broken promises and beautiful lies. And in the darkness, the board pieces continued moving toward confrontation. Roman didn't sleep. He stood in his penthouse office overlooking Milan's financial district, while dawn bled across the skyline in shades of bruised purple and dirty gold. The city looked almost innocent from 40 stories up, just buildings and streets and the slow crawl of early traffic. But Roman knew better. Beneath the postcard beauty, Milan was a machine built from compromises and violence and money that changed hands in conversations nobody recorded. He'd been running that machine for 15 years. Now Luciano Morelli wanted to take it from him, using Serafina as the leverage. Roman's phone buzzed. Dante's name appeared on the screen. "Talk," Roman said. "Preliminary sweep is complete. Luciano's got shell corporations in 7 countries, 3 offshore accounts we can confirm, and property holdings that don't match his declared income." "That's not enough." "I know. We're digging deeper. Financial forensics team is pulling transaction records going back 18 months. Should have something more concrete by noon." "Make it faster." "Roman," he put his hands on her last night, Dante, cornered her in a hallway and poisoned her thoughts about me. So I need concrete evidence of his operations by noon, not by whenever it's convenient. Silence stretched across the line. "Understood," Dante said finally. "I'll push the team." Roman disconnected and turned toward the window. His reflection stared back. Tattooed throat, storm gray eyes that looked older than 37, expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the violence underneath. He looked like what he was, a man built from discipline and calculated brutality who'd forgotten how to be anything else. Until Serafina. She'd looked at him like he was capable of something beyond enforcing territory and managing drug routes. Like maybe beneath the ink and the reputation there was still something worth saving. And last night, standing in that corridor with fear written across his face, Roman had finally admitted the truth. He loved her, not strategically, not because she served some operational purpose, Just loved her in the messy, terrifying way that made him want to burn down half of Milan to keep her safe. His phone buzzed again. Different number this time, encrypted line. Roman answered. We've got a problem. The voice belonged to Marco Santi, one of Roman's territory managers in the southern districts. 3 of our distribution points got hit overnight. Clean operations, no violence, just walked in, cleared the product, left. How much? 40 kilos, maybe 50. Jesus Christ. Roman's jaw tightened. Security footage? Wiped? Professionals? Luciano? That'd be my guess. Timing's too convenient. Roman closed his eyes briefly. This was how it started. Not with bombs or bullets, but with strategic pressure. Luciano was testing response times, probing for weaknesses, forcing Roman to react. Double security on all remaining distribution points, Roman said. Move the product to secondary locations. And find out who gave them access. Someone talked. Already working on it. Work faster. Roman disconnected and stood there in the pre-dawn light, feeling the machinery of war beginning to turn. Across the city, Serafina woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the immediate realization that everything had changed. She lay there for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, replaying the previous night in her head. The Gala, Luciano's poisoned words, Roman's raw confession in the corridor. Then I learn how to love you without turning you into something I control. The words had sounded like surrender and declaration simultaneously. Serafina threw off the blankets and padded into her kitchen. The apartment was small but bright. Exposed brick walls covered in photographs she'd taken over the years. Mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. Plants clustered near the windows because she liked living things, even if she forgot to water them half the time. She made coffee and stood at the window watching her street wake up. Bakery across the way opening its shutters. Old woman walking her dog. Everything normal. Except for the black sedan parked 40 meters down with 2 men inside who were definitely not waiting for the bakery to open. Roman's people. Serafina felt something twist in her chest. Gratitude mixed with resentment, mixed with fear. She'd wanted Roman to see her as an equal, not something fragile that needed protecting. But now she stood in her kitchen with armed guards outside and no clear understanding of what came next. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Hello? Serafina de Luca. The voice was smooth, familiar. Luciano. I hope I'm not calling too early. Her grip tightened on the phone. How did you get this number? I'm a well-connected man. I wanted to apologize for last night. The conversation in the corridor, I was too direct. Too harsh. You told me the truth. A version of it, Luciano said. But truth without context is just another kind of manipulation. And I manipulated you. Why are you calling? Because I think you deserve to understand what's really happening. Not Roman's version, not mine, the actual situation. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Meet me for coffee. 1 hour. Publico Cafe in the Brera district. Bring Roman's guards if it makes you feel safer. This isn't a trap. Then what is it? A conversation between 2 people caught in someone else's war. The line went dead. Serafina stood there holding the phone, pulse hammering. Every instinct screamed this was a terrible idea. Luciano was Roman's enemy. Meeting him felt like betrayal. But another part of her, the part that had survived growing up poor in a city that didn't forgive weakness, wanted to hear what he had to say. Because Roman had documented her as a vulnerability. And Luciano had stolen that documentation. And somewhere in the space between those 2 facts was a truth neither man was telling her. She looked at the black sedan outside her window. Then she got dressed. 40 minutes later, Serafina walked into Publico Cafe with Roman's guards trailing 10 meters behind. The cafe was small, tucked between a bookshop and a vintage clothing store, the kind of place where artists and students gathered to pretend they could afford Milan's rent prices. Luciano sat at a corner table wearing jeans and a sweater instead of last night's formal wear. He looked younger, less dangerous, almost normal. Thank you for coming, he said as she approached. I haven't decided if this is brave or stupid yet. Probably both, he gestured to the chair across from him. Coffee? The espresso here is better than it has any right to be. Serafina sat. One of Roman's guards positioned himself near the entrance. The other stayed outside. "Start talking," she said. Luciano leaned back, studying her with those dark, intelligent eyes. "How much do you actually know about Roman Vescari?" "Enough." "Do you know how he built his organization?" "I know the basics. Started small, worked his way up, made strategic alliances." "That's the sanitized version," Luciano said. "The real version is uglier. 15 years ago, Roman was nobody, just another kid from the Navigli district running protection schemes. Then his mentor, a man named Vito Marchese, got arrested on federal charges. The organization was vulnerable, bleeding territory, and Roman saw an opportunity. What did he do? He made a deal with prosecutors, gave them information about Vito's operations in exchange for immunity and reduced sentences for his own people. Then he systematically dismantled what remained of Vito's network and absorbed it into his own organization. Serafina's chest tightened. "You're saying he's an informant?" "Was. Past tense. But yes, Roman Vescari built his empire partially by cooperating with law enforcement, something our world doesn't usually forgive. Why are you telling me this?" "Because Roman controls information the same way he controls everything else," Luciano said quietly, "by deciding what people know and when they know it. He documented you as a vulnerability, but probably didn't tell you about the list itself until I forced his hand last night. Maybe he was protecting me. Or maybe he was controlling you. There's a difference." The barista brought espresso. Serafina wrapped her hands around the small cup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. "What do you want, Luciano?" "I want you to understand that Roman isn't some noble criminal with a code of honor. He's a calculator. Everything he does serves a purpose, including his relationship with you." "And what's your purpose?" Serafina asked sharply. "Why invite me to the gala? Why steal that file? Why tell me any of this?" Luciano smiled faintly. "Because I'm tired of playing games with someone who refuses to acknowledge we're playing them. Roman and I have been circling each other for 3 years. He controls the northern routes. I control the south. We maintain an uneasy balance, but recently Roman's been expanding, pushing into territories we agreed were neutral, testing boundaries. So this is about territory. It's always about territory, but Roman made it personal when he started using violence to settle disputes we could have negotiated. I don't believe you. 6 weeks ago, 3 of my distributors were found dead in a warehouse in Lambrate, executed. Roman's people left just enough evidence to make it clear who was responsible. Maybe they deserved it. Maybe, Luciano said. Or maybe Roman's becoming the thing he always feared, exactly like Vito Marchese, willing to kill anyone who threatens his control. Serafina stood abruptly. This conversation is over. Wait. No. You invited me here to poison my thoughts about Roman, just like you did last night. I'm not interested in your version of the truth any more than I'm interested in being used as leverage. She walked out before Luciano could respond. Roman's guards fell into step behind her as she hit the sidewalk, pulse hammering, thoughts racing. She didn't know what to believe anymore. Roman had documented her as a vulnerability without telling her. Luciano claimed Roman had built his empire through betrayal and violence, and she stood in the middle with no clear understanding of who was lying and who was just offering selective truth. Her phone buzzed. Roman's name appeared. She answered. What? Where are you? His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Walking home from a cafe. Which cafe? Why does it matter? Because my people just reported you met with Luciano Morelli. Silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. He called me, Serafina said finally. Wanted to talk. And you went. Yes. Jesus Christ, Serafina. Don't! Her voice came out harder than intended. Don't you dare lecture me about making dangerous choices when you're the one who documented me as a fucking vulnerability without telling me. That's not... I'm done with this conversation. I'm going home. Your guards can follow or not. I don't care. She disconnected before he could respond. 10 minutes later, she was back in her apartment, door locked, hands shaking as she poured water and tried to calm her breathing. Her phone rang again. Roman. She let it go to voicemail. It rang 3 more times over the next hour. She ignored all of them. Finally, around noon, someone knocked on her door. Serafina checked the peephole. Roman stood in the hallway alone, looking like he hadn't slept in days. She considered not opening the door, considered telling him to leave, considered a dozen different responses that would have been smarter than what she actually did. She opened the door. Roman looked at her with something raw and desperate written across his face. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "For what specifically? The list? The lies? The guards outside my building?" "All of it." He stepped inside when she moved back. The apartment suddenly felt smaller with him in it. "I'm sorry for documenting you without your knowledge. I'm sorry for not being honest about what you mean to me. And I'm sorry for putting guards outside without asking. But you're not going to remove them." "No." "Because you don't trust me to make my own decisions." "Because Luciano Morelli is dangerous and I can't—" Roman stopped, started again. "I can't lose you." "You don't have me, Roman. I'm not something you possess." "I know that." "Do you?" Serafina's voice cracked despite her efforts to keep it steady. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you see me as a variable to manage. Something to protect and control and keep safe regardless of what I want." Roman stood there in her small apartment, looking like he was trying to hold himself together with discipline and failing. "What did Luciano tell you?" he asked finally. "That you built your organization by betraying your mentor, that you cooperated with prosecutors, that you're expanding into neutral territory and killing people who get in your way." Roman's expression went carefully blank. "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe because you won't tell me the truth either." "You want the truth?" Roman's voice dropped to something cold and final. "Fine. 15 years ago, I made a deal with prosecutors to save my people from federal charges. Vito Marchese was going down regardless. The evidence was overwhelming. I gave them information that— You want the truth?" Roman's voice dropped to something cold and final. "Fine. 15 years ago, I made a deal with prosecutors to save my people from federal charges. Vito Marchese was going down regardless. The evidence was overwhelming. I gave them information that helped put him away faster in exchange for immunity for everyone who worked under me. 23 people who would have spent decades in prison walked free because I made that deal." Serafina stared at him. So Luciano was telling the truth. He was telling a version of it. What he didn't mention is that Vito was burning the organization from the inside, skimming profits, getting sloppy. People were dying because he prioritized his own greed over operational security. "I didn't betray a mentor. I stopped a cancer from killing everyone." "And then you absorbed his network." "Yes. Because someone had to. Because leaving that territory open would have started a war that would have killed hundreds of people." "How convenient for you." Roman's jaw tightened. "You think I wanted this? You think I built this empire because I enjoy it? I did what I had to do to survive, to keep my people alive. That's all. Is it?" Serafina stepped closer, anger replacing the confusion. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've spent 15 years justifying violence by telling yourself you had no choice. But there's always a choice, Roman. Always." "Not in my world." "Then maybe your world is the problem." The words landed between them like a blade hitting bone. Roman looked at her with something broken moving behind his eyes. "You're probably right. But it's the only world I know how to navigate. And I'm trying. I'm trying so goddamn hard not to drag you into it." "Too late," Serafina said quietly. "I'm already here. Guards outside my building, rival bosses calling my phone. You documented me as a vulnerability months ago, which means I've been a target since before I even knew we were playing this game. I never wanted— It doesn't matter what you wanted. It matters what happened. And what happened is that you made me into leverage without asking if I was willing to be that." Roman stood there in her small apartment, looking like he'd been gutted. "What do you want me to do?" he asked finally. "Tell me everything. Not the strategic version, not the sanitized explanation. Everything." So he did. For the next hour, Roman talked. About Vito Marchese and the deal with prosecutors. About building his organization from the wreckage of someone else's empire. About the violence required to maintain territory and the compromises necessary to keep powerful people cooperative. About the list, the vulnerability assessment compiled by his analysts to identify potential weaknesses before enemies could exploit them. About seeing Serafina's name near the top and realizing for the first time in 15 years that he'd become capable of feeling something beyond strategic calculation. I didn't know what to do with it, Roman said quietly. With you. Every instinct I have says people I care about become targets, liabilities. So I tried to keep distance, tried to convince myself we were just acquaintances. But then you'd look at me like maybe I wasn't just the violence I'd committed, and I couldn't. He stopped. I couldn't stay away. Serafina sat on her couch, arms wrapped around herself, processing everything. The file Luciano stole, she said. How bad is it? Bad enough. It contains operational intelligence about my organization, financial structures, territory maps, names of people who could be compromised. Including me. Yes. What's he going to do with it? Use it to dismantle everything I've built, piece by piece, and he'll start with the people on that list because hurting them hurts me. Serafina looked up at him. So what do we do? The we seemed to catch Roman off guard. He stared at her like she'd just offered him something he didn't know how to accept. You don't have to. I asked what we do, Roman, not what you do. I'm already involved. So either we figure this out together or I figure it out alone. Your choice. Roman looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Luciano's expanding into territories we agreed were neutral, he said finally. He's using the information from that file to target my distribution networks. 3 points got hit last night. He's testing my response time and weakening my infrastructure simultaneously. What's your response? I was planning to gather evidence of his operations and feed it to regulators. Financial crimes, shell corporations. Enough to trigger investigations that would freeze his assets and force him to focus on survival instead of expansion. That's smart. It's also slow. And while I'm building a case, he's dismantling my organization. So you need something faster. Yes, but anything faster means violence, and violence means escalation, and escalation means people die. Serafina stood and walked to her window, looking down at the black sedan still parked across the street. What if there's another way? She said slowly. What do you mean? Luciano called me this morning, wanted to meet. He's still trying to use me as leverage against you. Exactly, which is why you need to stay away from him. Or, Serafina turned to face him, I use his interest against him, feed him information that seems valuable but actually gives you the advantage. Roman's expression went completely flat. No. Why not? Because that puts you directly in his crosshairs. Because if he realizes you're working against him, he won't hesitate to hurt you. Because I'm not willing to use you as bait, no matter how strategic it might be. That's not your decision to make. The hell it isn't. Roman, oh, no. His voice carried absolute finality. I've spent 15 years making calculated decisions about risk and operational security. And the one thing I know with certainty is that I'm not gambling with your safety, not for territory, not for advantage, not for anything. Even if it means losing everything you've built? Yes. The single word hung in the air between them. Serafina stared at him, at the tattoos crawling up his throat, at the storm-gray eyes that had probably watched men die and never flinched, but right now looked completely terrified. You're serious, she said quietly. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Before she could respond, Roman's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his entire body went rigid. What? Serafina asked. Roman answered the call. Talk. Whatever Dante said on the other end made Roman's face drain of color. When? Roman asked, voice tight. More conversations Serafina couldn't hear. Lock down everything. Full security protocols. Nobody moves without clearance. Roman disconnected and looked at Serafina with something like devastation written across his face. What happened? Luciano just made his move. 2 of my people from that vulnerability list, Marco Santi and his sister Elena, were picked up outside their apartment building 20 minutes ago. Surveillance shows 4 men, professional operation. They're gone. Serafina's chest tightened. Kidnapped? Leverage. Roman's hands curled into fists. He's going to use them to force concessions, territory, financial assets. Maybe both. Can you negotiate? With Luciano? No, he doesn't negotiate. He positions and then he takes. Then what? Roman's phone buzzed again. Text message this time. He read it and his jaw locked. What? Serafina pressed. Roman turned the phone toward her. The message was simple. Trade. Marco and Elena for full withdrawal from the Northern Expansion territories. You have 6 hours to decide. After that, I start sending pieces. Below the text was a photo. Marco and Elena zip-tied to chairs in what looked like a basement. Both alive. Both terrified. Jesus Christ, Serafina breathed. Roman was already moving, grabbing his jacket, pulling out his phone. Where are you going? To my headquarters. I need to coordinate with my people, figure out where Luciano's holding them, plan an extraction. In 6 hours? I don't have a choice. Serafina grabbed his arm. Wait. Think about this. Luciano's expecting you to either negotiate or attack. What if you do neither? Roman looked at her. What are you talking about? You said he doesn't negotiate. That means this offer is a trap. He wants you to either give up territory, which weakens you, or attack his position, which starts a war. Either way, he wins. So what do you suggest? Give him what he wants, but make it poisonous. Roman stared at her. Explain. You have 6 hours. That's enough time to make the Northern Territories look valuable on paper while stripping them of actual operational assets. Move your people out, relocate product, transfer the infrastructure to shell companies he can't actually access, then agree to the trade. He'll realize, eventually, but by then you'll have Marco and Elena back, and Luciano will be stuck managing territories that look profitable but actually cost him resources to maintain. Roman studied her with something like awe breaking through the fear. That's manipulative, strategic, exactly what you'd do if you weren't emotionally compromised? A ghost of a smile crossed Roman's face despite everything. I was going to say brilliant. I grew up poor in Milan, Serafina said. You learn to make things look valuable when they're not. It's survival. Roman pulled out his phone and called Dante. Change of plans, he said when Dante answered. I need you to initiate full asset relocation protocols for all Northern Expansion territories. Equipment, product, personnel, everything moves in the next 4 hours. Make it look normal. No panic. Just standard operational transfers. Dante's response was too quiet for Serafina to hear. Because we're going to give Luciano exactly what he wants, Roman said, and it's going to cost him everything. He disconnected and looked at Serafina. This could work, he said quietly, but if it doesn't, then we figure out the next move. Together. Roman stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off him, smell his cologne mixed with coffee and stress. I don't deserve you, he said quietly. Probably not, but you've got me anyway. He kissed her then, not gentle, not careful, just desperate and honest and tasting like fear and relief mixed together. When they broke apart, Roman's phone was already buzzing with updates from his people. The machinery of war had started turning in a different direction. The next 4 hours moved like a storm. Roman coordinated from Serafina's apartment because moving to his headquarters would signal panic to anyone watching. Dante managed the ground operations, relocating product, transferring personnel, creating shell companies that would look legitimate on paper but collapse under scrutiny. Serafina watched Roman work with brutal efficiency. Phone calls in 3 languages. Financial transfers executed with surgical precision. Personnel moved across the city like chess pieces repositioning for an attack that wouldn't come. This was Roman Vescari in his element, not the man who looked at her like she was something precious. He didn't know how to hold. The calculator. The architect. The king of Milan's underworld moving pieces across a board only he could fully see. And watching him, Serafina realized something terrifying. She wasn't afraid of this version of Roman. She understood it. Around hour 3, Dante called with a problem. The Lambrate facility won't empty in time, Dante said, voice tight. We've got 18 people and 40 kilos that can't be relocated before the deadline. Why not? Roman asked. Police checkpoint on Via Padova. They're running vehicle inspections. Moving that much product through the checkpoint is suicide. Roman closed his eyes briefly. Reroute through the southern corridor. That's Luciano's territory. I know, do it anyway. Use the secondary roads, minimal profile. If his people spot the movement, they'll assume we're panicking, which sells the story we're trying to tell. And if they intercept, then we lose 40 kilos, and 18 people have to explain themselves to police. But we don't have another option. Dante disconnected. Roman stood at Serafina's window, watching the street below, with the flat expression of someone calculating acceptable losses. You can't save everyone, Serafina said quietly. I know. Then why do you look like you're failing? Because I put those 18 people in that position. Every decision I make ripples outward, and when things go wrong, it's not me who pays the price. It's people like Marco and Elena, like those 18 in Lambrate, people who trusted me to keep them safe. They're adults. They made choices. They made choices based on information I controlled. That's not the same as free will. Serafina walked over and stood beside him. You can't control everything, Roman, no matter how hard you try. I can try harder. Or you can accept that chaos exists, that people make their own decisions, that you're not responsible for every consequence in a world built from impossible choices. Roman looked at her. Is that what you think I am? Someone making impossible choices? I think you're someone who convinced himself that control equals safety, but it doesn't. It just means you carry more weight than any person should have to carry alone. Before Roman could respond, his phone rang. Unknown number. He answered on speaker. Roman Vescari. Luciano's voice poured through the line, smooth and cold. Have you made your decision? I accept your terms. Northern expansion territories in exchange for Marco and Elena. Just like that? Just like that? Silence stretched across the line. You're more pragmatic than I expected, Luciano said finally. I'll send you coordinates for the exchange. 1 hour. You come alone. No, I bring my second. That wasn't the deal. The deal was territory for people. You didn't specify delivery terms. I bring Dante or there's no exchange. Another pause. Fine, Luciano said. But if I see more than 2 of you, Marco and Elena die. Understood? Understood. The line went dead. Roman immediately called Dante. Meet me at Serafina's building in 20 minutes. Full tactical gear, but concealed. We're making the exchange. Copy that. Roman turned to Serafina. You need to stay here. Lock the door. Don't answer for anyone except me or Dante. Roman, please. He took her face in his hands. Please just let me do this without worrying about you too. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist on coming, wanted to do something other than wait while he walked into whatever trap Luciano had prepared. But she saw the fear in his eyes. Not fear for himself, fear for her. So she nodded. Roman kissed her once more, then left. Serafina locked the door and stood at her window watching the black sedan pull away from the curb with Roman inside. She'd never felt more powerless in her life. The exchange point was an abandoned warehouse in the Porta Romana industrial district, the kind of place where legitimate businesses had died years ago and only ghosts and criminals remained. Roman and Dante arrived in separate vehicles, meeting 2 blocks away to coordinate. Thermal imaging shows 4 heat signatures inside, Dante reported, studying a tablet. 2 stationary, probably Marco and Elena. 2 mobile, guards. Luciano? Not showing on thermal. Either he's not here or he's got some kind of shielding. He's here, Roman said. This is theater. He wants to watch. They approached the warehouse on foot, moving through shadows with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this before. The building loomed against the night sky like a monument to industrial decay. Broken windows. Graffiti covering every visible surface. The smell of rust and rot thick in the air. The entrance was a rolling metal door, partially open. Roman and Dante slipped inside. The interior was one massive space. Concrete floor, steel support beams, old machinery rusting in corners like sleeping monsters. And in the center, under a single hanging work light, Marco and Elena sat zip-tied to chairs, both alive. Both showing signs of rough handling, but no serious injuries. Luciano stepped out of the shadows wearing expensive casual clothes and a smile that made Roman's trigger finger itch. Punctual, Luciano said. I appreciate that. Where are your people? Roman asked. Around, you know how it is. Security measures. The territories are being transferred as we speak. Shell companies in your name, full operational control. Give me Marco and Elena. Not quite yet. Luciano walked closer, studying Roman with those dark, intelligent eyes. I want to make sure we understand each other first. Understand what? That this isn't about territory. It never was. Roman's chest tightened. Then what is it about? Respect. Luciano stopped 3 meters away. For 3 years, we've maintained balance, mutual understanding, but recently you've forgotten that balance requires both parties to honor boundaries. You expanded north without consultation. You escalated violence without warning. You treated our agreement like it was optional. Your distributors were cutting product with fentanyl, killing customers. That's bad for everyone's business. So you executed them without discussion. I sent you a message first. A message isn't a conversation, Roman. It's a monologue with consequences. Are we really doing this now? Roman gestured toward Marco and Elena. You kidnapped 2 people to lecture me about communication? I kidnapped 2 people to remind you that you're not untouchable, that your empire exists because I allow it to exist, that every territory you control, every operation you run, every political connection you maintain, all of it happens inside a framework of cooperation you seem to have forgotten. Roman's jaw locked. So what do you want? An apology? Public submission? What? I want you to remember your place. The words landed like a slap. Dante shifted slightly, hand moving toward the concealed weapon under his jacket. Easy, Luciano said without looking at him. We're all professionals here. No need for theatrics. Then cut them loose, Roman said coldly. You made your point. Luciano studied him for a long moment. Then he pulled out a phone and made a call. Bring them, he said simply. Footsteps echoed from the back of the warehouse. 3 men emerged from the shadows. And between them, zip-tied and bloodied, was Dante's younger brother Francesco. Roman's world tilted. What the hell is this? Dante's voice came out strangled. Insurance, Luciano said calmly. You see, I knew you'd try something clever, Roman. Knew you'd strip those territories before handing them over. Knew you'd attempt to make my victory poisonous, so I took additional precautions. This wasn't part of the deal, Roman said, voice dropping to something lethal. The deal just changed. You give me the northern territories, actual operational assets, not empty shells. Or I kill Francesco, and then Marco, and then Elena. 1 every hour until you comply. Dante looked at Roman with raw panic in his eyes. You can't do this, Roman said quietly. I already did. Luciano gestured toward Francesco. The question is whether you're willing to sacrifice 3 lives to avoid losing territory you shouldn't have taken in the first place. Roman stood there feeling every calculation he'd made over the past 4 hours collapse. Luciano had predicted everything. The asset relocation, the strategic maneuvering, the attempt to poison the exchange. And he'd countered by taking the one thing Roman couldn't afford to lose. Not territory, not money, people. You've got 1 hour, Luciano said. After that, Francesco dies. Clock's ticking, Roman. He disappeared back into the shadows with his men, leaving Roman and Dante standing in the warehouse with 3 hostages and no good options. Dante turned to Roman with something broken in his eyes. What do we do? Dante asked hoarsely. And for the first time in 15 years, Roman Vescari, the calculator, the architect, the king of Milan's underworld who'd built an empire from impossible choices, didn't have an answer, because every move he could make led to the same place. Someone he cared about was going to die, and this time he couldn't calculate his way out of it. The warehouse felt like a tomb. Roman stood there staring at Francesco, 24 years old, Dante's only family, the kid who'd joined Roman's organization 6 months ago because he wanted to be like his older brother, and felt something inside himself finally break. We call everyone, Dante said desperately. Every soldier we have. We storm this place. They'll kill all 3 before we get through the door, Roman interrupted quietly. Luciano's not stupid. He's got exit strategies, backup teams, contingency plans. A full assault gets everyone killed. Then what? Dante's voice cracked. I'm not letting Francesco die because you made a strategic mistake. The accusation hung in the air like gunsmoke. I know, Roman said. Then fix it. I'm trying. Try harder. Roman pulled out his phone with hands that wanted to shake and refused to let them. He had 1 hour. 1 hour to either sacrifice territory that kept 300 people employed and 24 families fed, Or sacrifice 3 lives to maintain an empire built from compromises he was finally starting to question? For 15 years, Roman had made these calculations. Territory versus lives, money versus loyalty, strategic advantage versus moral cost. He'd always chosen strategy, always chosen survival, always chosen the empire. But standing in that warehouse, looking at Francesco's terrified face, Roman realized something that made his chest feel like it was caving in. He couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't make the calculation that turned human beings into acceptable losses. Couldn't choose empire over the people who'd trusted him to keep them safe. Couldn't be the man he'd built himself into becoming. His phone buzzed. Serafina's name appeared on the screen. He answered. "Roman, where are you?" "Porta Romana Industrial District. The exchange went bad." "How bad?" He told her everything in clipped sentences. Francesco. Luciano's demands. The impossible choice. Silence stretched across the line. "What are you going to do?" Serafina asked finally. And Roman Viscari, the man who'd spent 15 years building an empire from calculated violence, said the only true thing left. "I don't know. I don't know." The admission hung in the air like a confession Roman had spent 15 years avoiding. Serafina's voice came through the phone, quiet and steady. "Then stop trying to know. Stop calculating. Just tell me what you feel." "I feel like I'm watching everything I built collapse because I made the mistake of caring about people more than territory." "That's not a mistake, Roman. That's called being human. Human gets people killed in my world. So does being a calculator. Francesco's in that warehouse because Luciano knew exactly how you think. He predicted your moves because you're predictable when you prioritize strategy over everything else." Roman closed his eyes. She was right. Luciano had played him perfectly because Roman had done exactly what 15 years of survival instincts told him to do. Strip assets, minimize losses, turn apparent defeat into strategic advantage. Except this time the strategy had backfired catastrophically. "What do I do?" Roman asked quietly. "Something Luciano won't predict, something human instead of strategic." "Like what?" "Give him what he actually wants." "Territory?" "No, respect. He said it himself. This isn't about territory. It's about you treating him like an obstacle instead of an equal. So stop fighting him and start negotiating like you actually value what he has to say." Roman opened his eyes and looked at Dante, who was staring at his younger brother with barely controlled panic. "He'll see through it," Roman said. "Maybe. Or maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe he really does just want you to acknowledge the balance you've been disrupting. Either way, you've got 53 minutes before Francesco dies. So you either try something different, or you watch 3 people die, proving you were right about strategy not working." The line went dead. Roman stood there feeling like Serafina had just reached through the phone and ripped out something essential. She was right. He'd spent 15 years being the smartest person in every room, calculating, positioning, treating every interaction like a chess match where winning meant survival. But Francesco wasn't a chess piece. Neither was Marco or Elena. They were people who'd trusted him, who'd followed him because they believed he'd keep them safe. And right now, safe meant putting aside everything Roman had built himself into and trying something he'd stopped doing 15 years ago. Being honest. Roman pulled out his phone and dialed the number Luciano had called from earlier. Luciano answered on the second ring. 48 minutes, Roman. Hope you're making progress." "I want to talk." "We are talking. In person. Just the 2 of us. No soldiers, no guns, no theater." Silence stretched across the line. "Why would I agree to that?" Luciano asked finally. "Because you were right. This isn't about territory. It never was, and I've been too stubborn to admit that until now." "Stubborn or stupid?" "Both, probably." Luciano laughed, the sound carrying genuine amusement. "Where?" "The office above the warehouse floor. 5 minutes." "Alone?" "Completely. This could be a trap." "It could be, but you've got 3 hostages and I've got 45 minutes. If I wanted to trap you, I'd have chosen something with better odds." Another pause. 5 minutes, Luciano said. "You bring a weapon and Francesco dies first." The line disconnected. Dante grabbed Roman's arm. "What the hell are you doing?" "Trying something different. He's going to kill you." "Oh, maybe. But doing this the way I've always done it gets Francesco killed for certain. At least this way there's a chance. A chance at what? At being someone other than the man I've spent 15 years becoming. Roman pulled away and headed toward the metal stairs leading to the second-floor office. His pulse hammered, but his hands stayed steady. 15 years of discipline wouldn't evaporate just because he decided to try honesty instead of strategy. The office was small and filthy. Broken desk, shattered window. Old paperwork scattered across the floor like archaeology from a dead business. A single chair sat in the corner, probably left behind because it wasn't worth moving. Roman stood in the center of the room and waited. 3 minutes later, footsteps echoed on the metal stairs. Luciano appeared in the doorway alone, hands visible, no weapon drawn. "This is unexpected," Luciano said, "for both of us." Luciano stepped inside and leaned against the wall, studying Roman with those dark, intelligent eyes. "So talk." "You were right about the balance, about me treating our agreement like it was optional, about escalating without consultation." "I know I was right. That's not new information." "But I didn't just escalate because I'm arrogant," Roman continued. "I escalated because your distributors were killing customers with contaminated product, and I couldn't figure out how to tell you that without it sounding like I was trying to undermine your operation." Luciano's expression shifted slightly. "What are you talking about?" 6 weeks ago, 3 overdose deaths traced back to fentanyl-laced heroin from your southern distribution network. The product was supposed to be clean. Someone in your organization was cutting it to increase profits and not telling you. And instead of bringing that to my attention, you executed them. Yes. Why? Because I assumed you already knew. Assumed you were testing me by seeing how I'd respond. And I responded the way I always respond, with violence designed to send a message. Luciano pushed off the wall, anger flickering across his face. "You thought I was deliberately poisoning my own product stream? I thought you were making a strategic choice I didn't understand, and rather than ask, I acted. That's..." Luciano stopped, started again. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I know. You killed 3 of my people based on an assumption. Yes? And then expanded into neutral territory without explaining why. Yes." Luciano stared at him. "You're either the most arrogant person I've ever met or the worst communicator in organized crime." "Probably both." Despite everything, Luciano laughed. "Christ, Roman, do you have any idea how much easier this would have been if you just called me 6 weeks ago?" "I'm starting to." Luciano walked to the broken window and looked out at the warehouse floor below, where Marco, Elena, and Francesco sat under guard. "I didn't know about the contamination," Luciano said quietly. "If someone in my organization was cutting product with fentanyl, they were acting without authorization. That kind of operation brings federal attention neither of us can afford." "I should have told you." "Yes, you should have." Luciano turned back toward him. "But you didn't because you've spent 15 years building an empire where communication equals vulnerability, where showing someone your reasoning gives them ammunition, where trust is a liability instead of an asset. You're not wrong. I know I'm not, because I've done the same thing. We both have. We've built organizations where strength means never asking for help and strategy means never being honest." Roman's chest tightened. "So what do we do about it?" "We start over. New agreement. Actual communication. Regular meetings where we discuss problems before they become executions. And you give me the Northern Territories, real assets, not empty shells, as restitution for the 3 people you killed without consultation. And Francesco, Marco, and Elena. Go free the moment we finalize the new terms." Roman studied Luciano carefully, looking for the trap, the hidden angle, the strategic positioning that would turn this apparent cooperation into another layer of manipulation. But all he saw was a man who looked as tired of playing games as Roman felt. "Why now?" Roman asked. "Why offer this instead of just taking everything?" "Because taking everything means war. War means federal attention. Federal attention means we both lose. And honestly," Luciano smiled faintly, "I'm getting too old to burn down empires just to prove a point. I'd rather run a profitable organization with clear boundaries than spend the next 5 years fighting over territory neither of us actually needs." "That simple?" "That's simple. Assuming you can actually commit to communication instead of unilateral violence." Roman thought about the past 15 years, the compromises, the calculations, the slow transformation from a kid trying to protect his people into a king who'd forgotten why protection mattered in the first place. Thought about Serafina telling him that control didn't equal safety. Thought about standing in this warehouse realizing he couldn't calculate his way out of caring about people. "I can commit," Roman said finally, "on one condition. Which is, you tell me who gave you access to my server, who stole that vulnerability file." Luciano's expression went carefully neutral. "Why does that matter?" "Because someone inside my organization betrayed me, and I need to know who before I can move forward with any agreement based on trust." "You won't like the answer." "Tell me anyway." Luciano pulled out his phone, tapped a few times, then turned the screen toward Roman. The image showed a man in his mid-50s, gray hair, expensive suit, face Roman had known for 12 years. Alessandro Russo, Roman's financial advisor and one of his longest-serving confidants. Roman's world tilted. "No," he said quietly. "Alessandro wouldn't." "He's been feeding me information for 8 months, Luciano said. "Financial structures, personnel movements, operational intelligence, including that vulnerability assessment." "Why?" "Because you made him a promise 12 years ago. Said when you'd built the empire to a certain size, you'd start transitioning to legitimate business, real estate, import-export, legal operations. But you never did. You just kept expanding, and Alessandro got tired of waiting for you to become the man you promised you'd be." Roman felt like he'd been gutted. Alessandro had been there since the beginning, had helped structure the financial networks that kept the empire running, had advised on every major expansion and consolidation, had sat across from Roman 1,000 times discussing strategy, and never once indicated he was betraying everything they'd built. "Where is he?" Roman asked, voice flat. "Safe. Under my protection. He knew you'd react badly when you found out." He was right. "Roman, he didn't just betray operational intelligence, Luciano. He gave you a list of people I care about. People who are now in danger because Alessandro decided I wasn't moving fast enough toward legitimacy. Which is why I'm telling you now instead of later. Because part of our new agreement is that Alessandro stays under my protection until you've cooled down enough not to kill him. That's not negotiable." "Yes, it is. Because Alessandro's betrayal is the only reason I know about the contaminated product, the expansion rationale, and the fact that you've been trying to protect people instead of just acquiring territory. He gave me context you never would have provided yourself." Roman's hands curled into fists. He put Serafina's name on that list. He documented reality. Serafina was already a vulnerability the moment you started caring about her. All Alessandro did was make it visible. To you, to my enemies. To someone who might actually help you protect her instead of exploit her. Which is what I'm doing right now by offering you this deal instead of burning down everything you've built. The logic was sound. Roman hated that the logic was sound. "I want to talk to him," Roman said finally. "After we finalize the agreement, after Francesco, Marco, and Elena are safe, after you've had time to process this without immediate access to weapons." "You don't trust me." "I don't trust anyone who's just discovered their closest advisor has been betraying them for 8 months. Trust comes after we've both proven we can actually cooperate." Roman looked at Luciano and saw something he'd missed before. Not an enemy, a mirror. Someone who'd built an empire the same way Roman had, through violence and calculation, and slowly forgetting why any of it mattered. Someone who was just as tired of the game. "Okay," Roman said quietly. "Okay, I agree to your terms. Northern territories transferred with full operational assets as restitution. Regular communication instead of unilateral action. Alessandro stays under your protection until I've cooled down, and Francesco, Marco, and Elena go free tonight." Luciano studied him for a long moment. "Just like that?" "Just like that. Because continuing to fight over territory I shouldn't have taken in the first place isn't worth watching 3 people die. And because Serafina was right. I've spent 15 years being predictable. Time to try something different." "Serafina told you to do this?" "She told me to stop calculating and start being human. Turns out being human means admitting when you're wrong and accepting consequences instead of fighting everything." Luciano smiled. "I like her. She's smarter than both of us." "She really is." You planning to marry her? The question caught Roman off guard. What? Serafina. You planning to marry her or just keep her in the undefined space between acquaintance and liability? Roman stopped, started again. I don't know. I'm not sure I know how to be with someone without turning it into strategy. Then learn. Because if Alessandro's intel is accurate, she's the only person in this city who makes you feel like maybe you're not just the sum of every violent decision you've made, and that's worth more than any territory. Roman stared at him. That's almost philosophical. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation. Luciano pulled out his phone and made a call. Release them, all three, safe transport to their homes. He disconnected and looked at Roman. Deal's done. I'll have my lawyers draw up the territory transfers tomorrow. We'll schedule our first communication meeting for next week. Neutral location, actual discussion instead of coded threats. Agreed. They stood there in the filthy office while shouting echoed from the warehouse floor below. Dante's voice calling Francesco's name, relief and chaos mixing together. One more thing, Luciano said. What? The contaminated product. I'll handle it internally. Find out who was responsible and make sure it doesn't happen again. How? My way, which means you don't ask questions and I don't provide details. We're cooperating now, not merging organizations. Fair enough? Luciano headed toward the stairs, then paused. Roman? Yeah? Thank you for not being the person I expected you to be tonight. Thank you for giving me the option. Luciano disappeared down the stairs. Roman stood alone in the office, feeling like he'd just survived something he didn't fully understand. Not a fight, not a negotiation, a transformation. He pulled out his phone and called Serafina. She answered immediately. Are you alive? For now. Francesco? Free. Marco and Elena too. Deal's done. What deal? I'll explain everything, but right now I just need to hear your voice and remember why any of this matters. Serafina's breath caught. Roman, I love you, he said quietly. I'm terrible at it. I don't know how to do it without turning it into strategy. But I love you, and I'm going to figure out how to be someone worthy of that. Silence stretched across the line. You're already worthy, Serafina said finally, voice rough with emotion. You just needed to stop calculating long enough to notice. Roman closed his eyes. I'm coming to you, soon as I finish here. I'll be waiting. He disconnected and headed down the stairs. The warehouse floor was chaos. Dante had Francesco wrapped in a crushing hug, while Marco and Elena stood nearby looking shell-shocked, but alive. Luciano's people had already disappeared like ghosts, leaving no evidence they'd been there except the cut zip ties on the concrete floor. Dante looked up as Roman approached. His eyes were red but grateful. Thank you, Dante said hoarsely. Don't thank me. Thank Serafina. She's the one who told me to stop being smart and start being human. What did you give him? The Northern Territories. Real assets. Full operational control. Dante's expression tightened. That's the right call. We shouldn't have expanded there in the first place, and keeping territory isn't worth your brother's life. Dante stared at him. Who are you, and what did you do with Roman Viscari? I'm still figuring that out. They walked out of the warehouse together into the Milan night. The air smelled like rain and rust and possibility. Roman pulled out his phone and sent a text to his entire command structure. Emergency meeting, 6 a.m., my office, attendance mandatory. Because giving Luciano the Northern Territories was just the first step. The harder part was going to be explaining to 300 people why their king had just chosen lives over empire. And somewhere in the back of Roman's mind, Alessandro Russo's betrayal sat like a splinter he couldn't quite reach. The man who'd helped build everything, who'd been there since almost the beginning, who'd decided Roman wasn't becoming the person he'd promised to be and chose betrayal over communication. Roman would deal with that later. Right now, he just needed to get to Serafina, needed to hold her, and remember what it felt like to be something other than the violence he'd committed. Needed to figure out how to build a life instead of just managing an empire. The drive back to Serafina's apartment took 20 minutes through empty Milan streets. Roman's security detail followed at a discreet distance, giving him space but maintaining protection. He parked illegally outside her building and took the stairs 2 at a time. She opened the door before he could knock. They looked at each other for a long moment. Roman in his expensive suit that smelled like warehouse dust and fear. Serafina in pajama pants and one of his old shirts she'd stolen months ago. Then she pulled him inside and wrapped her arms around him like she was trying to hold together something that wanted to fall apart. Roman buried his face in her hair and just breathed. "I was terrified," Serafina whispered against his chest. "Me too." "What happened?" So Roman told her everything. The conversation with Luciano, the new agreement, Alessandro's betrayal, the choice to prioritize lives over territory. Serafina listened without interrupting, her hands gripping his shirt like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. When he finished, she pulled back and looked at him with something fierce and proud in her eyes. "You did the right thing. I gave up territory that keeps hundreds of people employed. You saved 3 lives. That's not nothing, Roman. That's everything. My people might not see it that way. Then your people don't understand what leadership actually means. It's not about winning every fight. It's about knowing which fights are worth winning and which ones cost too much." Roman cupped her face in his hands. "How did you get so wise?" "I grew up poor. You learn fast or you don't survive." He kissed her then, slow and careful and tasting like relief mixed with exhaustion. When they broke apart, Serafina led him to her couch and made him sit while she brought water and made him drink it. "When's the last time you ate?" she asked. "I don't remember." "Of course you don't." She disappeared into the kitchen and returned with bread and cheese and olives. "Eat." Roman ate mechanically while Serafina sat beside him, one hand resting on his knee like an anchor. "What are you going to do about Alessandro?" she asked finally. "I don't know. Part of me wants to hunt him down and make him explain why betraying me was easier than just talking to me. But another part already knows the answer. Which is that I built an organization where communication equals vulnerability, where showing weakness means losing position, where trust is something you calculate instead of something you give. Alessandro didn't betray me because he was malicious. He betrayed me because I created an environment where betrayal felt like the only option. That's not entirely fair to yourself, isn't it? I documented you as a vulnerability instead of just telling you I loved you. I expanded into neutral territory instead of discussing contaminated product with Luciano. I've spent 15 years treating every relationship like a strategic asset instead of just being honest with people. Serafina was quiet for a moment. So what changes now? Everything. Nothing. I don't know. Roman set down the food and looked at her. I know I can't keep building an empire where the only language is violence and calculation, but I also don't know how to run an organization based on trust when I've spent 15 years teaching everyone that trust gets you killed. One person at a time, Serafina said quietly. You start with the people closest to you and you practice being honest. And when you fail, because you will fail, you acknowledge it and try again. That's all anyone can do. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, it's terrifying. But it's better than what you've been doing. Roman pulled her close and they sat there in her small apartment while Milan hummed outside the windows. Stay tonight, Serafina said. I have a meeting at 6 a.m. Then sleep here until 5. I'll make you coffee. You'll shower. You'll go terrify your command structure with whatever changes you're planning. But tonight, you're staying here with me. It wasn't a question. Roman found himself nodding anyway. They moved to her bedroom and Roman stripped down to his undershirt and boxers while Serafina turned off the lights. The bed was small and comfortable and smelled like her perfume mixed with laundry detergent. Roman lay there in the dark with Serafina curled against his side and tried to remember the last time he'd felt safe enough to actually sleep instead of just resting with one eye open. He couldn't. But tonight, in Serafina's bed with her breathing steady against his chest, Roman Vescari finally closed his eyes and let himself fall. And across the city, in a secure apartment under Luciano Morelli's protection, Alessandro Russo sat at a window watching Milan's skyline and wondering if he'd just saved Roman's life or condemned him. Because the hard truth Alessandro had learned over 12 years was simple. Men like Roman Vescari didn't change. They just found new ways to justify the violence. And tomorrow, when Roman stood in front of his command structure and tried to explain why he'd chosen lives over empire, Alessandro knew exactly what would happen. Some would understand, most wouldn't. And the ones who didn't would start questioning whether Roman Vescari was still fit to lead. The game wasn't over. It was just entering a new phase. And this time, the battlefield wasn't territory or money. It was Roman's soul. Roman woke at 4:30 to Serafina's alarm and the immediate weight of what he was about to do. She stirred beside him, hair tangled across the pillow, eyes still heavy with sleep. For a moment, they just looked at each other in the pre-dawn darkness. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "Yes, I do. They might not follow you after this. You're asking them to accept a completely different kind of leadership." "I know. And if they don't?" Roman sat up, running his hands through his hair. "Then I find out who I am without the empire. And maybe that's not the worst thing." Serafina reached for his hand. "I'm proud of you." "Don't be. Not yet. I haven't actually done anything except make promises in a warehouse." "You chose lives over territory. That's not nothing." Roman kissed her palm, then stood and started getting dressed. The suit from last night smelled like warehouse dust and fear, but it would have to do. He'd shower and change at his office before the meeting. Serafina made coffee while he tried to organize his thoughts into something resembling a coherent speech. She handed him a travel mug and walked him to the door. "Whatever happens today," she said, "you're not alone anymore. Remember that." Roman nodded, not trusting himself to speak without his voice breaking. Then he left. The drive to his headquarters took 15 minutes through empty Milan streets. The building was a converted bank in the financial district, all marble and brass and the kind of old-world elegance that made people forget they were walking into the nerve center of northern Italy's criminal operations. Roman's office occupied the entire top floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, minimalist furniture that cost more than most people's cars, abstract art on the walls that had probably been stolen from somewhere but looked expensive enough that nobody asked questions. He showered and changed into a fresh suit, then stood at the window watching dawn bleed across Milan's skyline. In 2 hours, he'd stand in front of his entire command structure and explain why he'd given away territory they'd fought to acquire, why he'd prioritized 3 lives over strategic advantage, why the king they'd followed for 15 years was trying to become someone fundamentally different. Some would understand, most wouldn't, and the ones who didn't would start questioning his fitness to lead. Roman's phone buzzed. Dante's name appeared. "Everyone's arriving," Dante said. "Conference room's filling up. They know something big happened." "How bad's the mood?" "Tense, confused. Marco and Elena told people about the rescue, but not the terms. So everyone knows you made a deal, but nobody knows what it cost." "That's probably for the best. Let me tell them myself." "Roman," Dante hesitated. "Some of the territory managers are already talking, saying you've gone soft, that prioritizing Francesco over operational security sets a dangerous precedent. They're not wrong, but they're not right either. You made the call that kept 3 people breathing. That counts for something." "We'll see if they agree." Roman disconnected and took one last look at the city he'd spent 15 years dominating through violence and calculation. Then he headed downstairs. The conference room was packed, 47 people representing every major operation in Roman's organization. Territory managers, financial advisors, security chiefs, distribution coordinators, the machinery that kept the empire running. They all went quiet when Roman entered. He stood at the head of the table and looked at faces he'd known for years. Some had been with him since the beginning. Others had joined as the organization expanded. All of them had followed him because he'd built something that felt permanent and profitable and worth the risks. "Last night, Luciano Morelli kidnapped 3 of our people," Roman began without preamble. "Marco Santi, Elena Santi, and Francesco Ricci. He demanded I give him the northern expansion territories in exchange for their release." Murmurs rippled through the room. "I agreed to his terms." The murmurs became protests. "Those territories represent 18 months of work," someone said from the back. Carlo Messina, one of the senior territory managers. "Millions in infrastructure investment, strategic positioning we can't easily replace." "I'm aware," Roman said. "Then why give them up for 3 people?" Carlo pressed. "We've lost soldiers before. It's part of the business." "Because this time I decided the business doesn't get to cost more than I'm willing to pay." "That's not how this works," another voice called out. Maria Conti, financial operations. "We're not a charity. We're an organization built on strategic decisions, and strategic decisions sometimes mean acceptable losses." "You're right," Roman said quietly. For 15 years, that's exactly how we've operated. Calculate acceptable losses, prioritize territory over people, build an empire where everything serves operational security and profit. And it worked. We grew. We dominated. We became exactly what I set out to create. He paused, letting the words settle. But somewhere along the way, I forgot why we built this in the first place. It wasn't about territory. It wasn't about profit. It was about protecting our people from organizations that treated them as expendable. And last night, standing in that warehouse, I realized I'd become exactly what we were supposed to be fighting against. So what? Carlos stood up. You're going soft? Prioritizing feelings over strategy? I'm prioritizing people over territory. There's a difference. Not from where I'm standing. You just gave away 18 months of work because you couldn't stomach the idea of losing Dante's brother. That's emotion, not leadership. The room erupted in competing voices, some agreeing with Carlo, others defending Roman's decision. The careful control Roman had maintained for 15 years fracturing in real time. Roman let it play out for 30 seconds, then raised his hand. Silence fell immediately. Here's what's going to happen, Roman said, voice dropping to something cold and final. The Northern Territories transfer to Luciano's control, effective immediately. We maintain our existing operations in all other regions, and we establish regular communication with Luciano's organization to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that led to this situation. Communication? Maria's voice carried disbelief. With our primary competitor? Yes. Because the alternative is continued escalation that ends with federal investigations neither organization can afford. This is insane, Carlos said. You're negotiating with someone who kidnapped our people. I'm negotiating with someone who responded to 18 months of aggressive expansion by using leverage I gave him when I documented people as vulnerabilities instead of just protecting them. The room went very quiet. What documentation? Someone asked. Roman pulled out his phone, connected it to the conference room display, and showed them the vulnerability assessment, the document Alessandro had compiled, the names, the analysis of who could be used as leverage. Serafina's name was clearly visible near the top. 6 months ago, I authorized this assessment, Roman said. Standard operational security. Identify potential weaknesses before enemies exploit them. But what I didn't consider is that creating this list made everyone on it a target, made them vulnerable specifically because I documented their importance. He disconnected the phone and looked at his people. Alessandro Russo stole this file and gave it to Luciano Morelli. He's been feeding intelligence to Luciano's organization for 8 months because he believed I was never going to transition to legitimate operations the way I promised I would. The room exploded. Alessandro betrayed us? For 8 months? Where is he? Under Luciano's protection, Roman said, cutting through the chaos. And he stays there until I've cooled down enough not to kill him. That's part of the agreement. You're protecting the man who betrayed us? Carlo's voice carried pure outrage. I'm honoring an agreement I made because it was the only way to save 3 lives. And yes, that means Alessandro gets protection. For now. This is unacceptable, Carlo said. You're asking us to accept massive territorial losses, communication with our enemies, and protection for a traitor. What kind of leadership is that? Roman looked at him steadily. The kind that prioritizes people over empire. And if you can't accept that, there's the door. Carlo stared at him. You're serious? Completely. I'm not asking anyone to follow me into something they don't believe in. If you think I've gone soft, if you think this decision makes me unfit to lead, then leave. No retaliation, no consequences. Just walk away. Nobody moved. The tension in the room felt thick enough to choke on. I know this isn't what you signed up for, Roman continued quietly. For 15 years I built an organization where strength meant never showing weakness and winning meant never backing down. And that worked until it didn't. Until I had to choose between maintaining that image or saving people I care about. So I chose people. And I'm going to keep choosing people, which means this organization is changing whether anyone likes it or not. Into what? Maria asked. Something sustainable. Something that doesn't require constant expansion and escalation. Something where communication replaces violence as the primary tool and people aren't just assets to be managed. That's not realistic in our world, someone said. Maybe not, but I'm going to try anyway, Because the alternative is watching this empire eat everyone inside it until there's nothing left except territory and profit and the hollowed-out shells of people who forgot why any of it mattered. Roman looked around the room at faces ranging from confused to angry to grudgingly understanding. "So here's your choice," he said. "Stay and help me build something different, or leave and find an organization that still operates the way we used to. Either way, the decision is yours. I'm not forcing anyone." Silence stretched across the conference room. Then Dante stood up. "I'm staying," he said simply. Marco and Elena stood together. "We're staying." One by one, people began standing. Not everyone. Carlo remained seated, arms crossed, face set in stubborn disagreement. So did 3 other senior managers. But 39 people stood. 39 people willing to at least try. Roman felt something in his chest unlock. "Thank you," he said quietly. Carlo stood then, but not in agreement. "I'm out. This isn't what I signed up for. You want to run an organization based on feelings and cooperation? You do it without me." He walked out. The 3 other managers followed. The door closed behind them with heavy finality. Roman looked at the 39 who remained. "We've got work to do. Territory needs to be formally transferred, communication protocols established with Luciano's people, and we need to figure out what sustainable operations look like when we're not constantly expanding." "What about Alessandro?" Maria asked. "That's between him and me, and it stays that way until I decide otherwise." The meeting broke up slowly. People filed out talking in low voices, processing everything that had just changed. Dante stayed behind after everyone else had left. 4 people walked, Dante said. "That's not bad considering what you just asked them to accept." "It's 4 people who think I've lost my edge. Or 4 people who can't adapt to a different kind of leadership. There's a difference." Roman looked at his second-in-command. "Thank you for standing first. That mattered. You saved my brother's life. Standing was the least I could do. It was more than that. You gave everyone else permission to follow. Without you, half that room walks." Dante nodded slowly. "What happens now?" "Now I go see Alessandro and figure out whether I'm capable of having a conversation with someone who betrayed me without it ending in violence. You want backup?" "No, this needs to be just the 2 of us." Roman left his headquarters and drove across Milan toward the address Luciano had provided. A secure apartment in the Porta Venezia district. Expensive, anonymous. The kind of place where people disappeared when they needed to avoid consequences. 2 of Luciano's guards stood outside the building. They didn't stop Roman, but they followed him upstairs with the silent efficiency of professionals doing their job. Alessandro answered the door on the second knock. He looked older than Roman remembered. Gray hair thinner. Lines around his eyes deeper. The 12 years they'd worked together suddenly visible in every wrinkle. "Roman," Alessandro said carefully. "Can I come in?" "Of course." The apartment was furnished but impersonal, temporary housing for someone in protective custody. Alessandro gestured toward the couch, but Roman remained standing. "Why?" Roman asked simply. Alessandro sat heavily in the chair by the window. "Because 12 years ago you promised me something. Said when we'd built the organization to a certain size, we'd start transitioning to legitimate operations, real estate development, import-export businesses, legal ventures that would let everyone retire without looking over their shoulders." "I remember. But you never did it. Every time we hit that threshold, you found reasons to expand further, more territory, bigger operations, greater control. The transition kept getting pushed back. Because the transition would have made us vulnerable, given competitors opportunities to move into territories we vacated." "Exactly," Alessandro said. "There was always a reason, always a strategic justification, and I watched you become someone who justified everything through operational necessity instead of remembering what we were trying to build." Roman crossed his arms. "So you decided betraying me was easier than just telling me this directly?" "I tried telling you 5 times over the past 3 years. You listened politely and then continued doing exactly what you'd been doing, so I stopped trying." "And started feeding intelligence to Luciano?" "Yes. Including that vulnerability assessment." "Including that," Alessandro met his eyes. "I knew documenting those people made them targets. That's why I gave the file to Luciano, because I thought maybe external pressure would force you to confront what you'd become." Roman felt rage building in his chest. You put Serafina's name on a list and gave it to my enemy because you thought it would teach me a lesson? I gave it to someone I believed would use it strategically, not violently. Luciano's not stupid. He knew killing people on that list would start a war neither organization could afford, so he used it as leverage to force communication you should have initiated yourself. That's... Roman stopped. Started again. That's the most manipulative thing I've ever heard. I learned from the best. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Roman wanted to hit him. Wanted to drag Alessandro out of that chair and make him understand what it felt like to be betrayed by someone you'd trusted for 12 years. Wanted violence because violence was easier than processing the painful truth beneath Alessandro's actions. That everything he'd said was accurate. Roman had made promises he never kept. Had justified expansion through operational necessity. Had become someone who documented feelings instead of having them. Had built an empire where betrayal felt like the only option because communication equaled vulnerability. I should kill you, Roman said quietly. Probably, Alessandro agreed, but you won't. Why not? Because you're trying to become someone different, someone who prioritizes people over empire, and killing me would prove you're still the man I betrayed instead of the man you're trying to be. Roman stood there in that anonymous apartment feeling like Alessandro had just stripped away every defense he'd built. I hate you, Roman said finally. I know. You betrayed everything we built. I betrayed someone I thought had already betrayed himself. That doesn't make it right. No, Alessandro said. It doesn't. But it was the only thing I could think to do that might actually get your attention. Roman walked to the window and looked down at Milan spreading out below. The city that had made him, that he'd conquered, that he was now trying to lead differently. What do you want? Roman asked without turning around. Permission to disappear, new identity, enough money to start over somewhere Luciano's protection isn't necessary. And in exchange, I give you everything. Every piece of intelligence I fed to Luciano over 8 months. Every conversation, every strategic decision based on information I provided. Complete transparency so you can evaluate what damage was done and what needs repairing. Roman turned to face him. That doesn't make us even. No, it doesn't. We'll never be even. But it's the only restitution I can offer. Roman studied the man who'd helped build his empire and then tried to dismantle it. Tried to find rage or betrayal or the clean clarity of justified violence. Found only exhaustion. You have 48 hours to compile everything, Roman said finally. After that, you disappear. New identity, clean break. And if I ever see you again, the protection agreement is void. Understood. And Alessandro? Roman stopped at the door. You were right about all of it. I did become someone who justified everything through operational necessity, who documented people instead of protecting them, who made promises I never kept. So thank you for forcing me to confront that, even if your method was about as subtle as a knife to the throat. Alessandro's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I never wanted to betray you. I just couldn't figure out how to save you from yourself. You didn't save me. Serafina did. You just made the cost of not changing catastrophically clear. Roman left before Alessandro could respond. The drive back across Milan took him past the Brera district, past Serafina's apartment building where everything had started to change, past galleries and cafes and the ordinary machinery of a city that didn't know it was built on compromises and violence and money that changed hands in conversations nobody recorded. Roman's phone buzzed, text from Luciano. Heard about your meeting? 4 walked? Not bad. Let me know when you're ready to schedule our first communication session. Roman typed back, next week. Neutral location, actual discussion instead of coded threats. Looking forward to it. Roman pulled over and sat in his car watching people move through their lives. Going to work, meeting friends, existing in a version of Milan where organized crime was something they read about in newspapers instead of the invisible architecture supporting their economy. He thought about the past 15 years, everything he'd built, everyone he'd hurt, the slow transformation from a kid trying to protect his people into a king who'd forgotten why protection mattered. Thought about last night in the warehouse when he'd finally chosen people over empire. Thought about Serafina telling him that control didn't equal safety. Thought about the 39 people who'd stood up this morning willing to at least try something different. His phone rang. Serafina's name appeared. How did it go? She asked. 4 people walked. 39 stayed. And I just had a conversation with Alessandro that didn't end in violence. That's progress. Is it? I gave away territory, lost experienced managers, and let the man who betrayed me disappear with minimal consequences. Doesn't exactly feel like winning. Because it's not winning, it's growing. There's a difference. Roman closed his eyes. I'm tired, Serafina. Tired of calculating. Tired of justifying. Tired of being the person everyone expects me to be. Then stop being that person. Just like that? Just like that. You've already started. Last night you chose lives over empire. This morning you chose honesty over image. This afternoon you chose growth over revenge. You're already becoming someone different. You just need to keep going. What if I can't? What if 15 years of conditioning is too strong to overcome? Then you fail, and you get back up, and you try again. That's all anyone can do. Roman sat there listening to her breathe across the phone line. This woman who'd seen him at his worst and somehow still believed he was capable of being better. Come over tonight, Serafina said. Bring wine. We'll cook something. You can tell me about the meeting, and I'll tell you about the artist I'm featuring next month. And we'll just exist together without any empires or territories or strategic calculations. That sounds perfect. Good. I'll see you at 7. She disconnected. Roman sat in his car for another 5 minutes, then drove to his penthouse to shower and change and try to figure out what normal clothes looked like when you weren't performing leadership. That evening, he showed up at Serafina's apartment with wine and flowers and the unfamiliar feeling of being someone on a date instead of a king managing his empire. She opened the door wearing jeans and a sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup, looking more beautiful than she'd looked in that crimson gown at the gala. You brought flowers, she said, smiling. Is that okay? It's perfect. Very human. Very non-strategic. They cooked together in her small kitchen, Serafina teaching him how to make proper carbonara, while he told her about the meeting, and Alessandro, and the uncomfortable sensation of choosing growth over revenge. You did good today, Serafina said, as she stirred pasta water. Harder than most people realize. Doesn't feel good. Feels like failure. Because you spent 15 years defining success as winning every fight. But success can also mean knowing when to stop fighting and start building something sustainable. When did you get so wise? I've always been this wise. You were just too busy calculating to notice. They ate at her small table by the window overlooking the street, talked about art and music and the way Milan changed in autumn when the tourists thinned out and the city belonged to people who actually lived there. Normal conversation, normal intimacy. The kind of thing Roman had forgotten existed. After dinner, they moved to the couch with wine, and Serafina curled against his side while rain started pattering against the windows. What happens now? Serafina asked quietly. Now I figure out how to actually run an organization based on communication instead of violence. How to transition toward legitimate operations without creating vulnerabilities. How to be a leader people follow because they believe in the vision instead of just fearing the consequences. That's a lot. It's everything. And I have no idea if it's possible. But you're going to try anyway. I'm going to try anyway. Roman looked down at her. Because you make me believe maybe I'm capable of being something other than the violence I've committed. And that's worth failing for. Serafina tilted her head up and kissed him slowly. When they broke apart, she said, I love you, Roman Vescari. The version you are now and the version you're trying to become. Roman felt something in his chest crack open completely. I love you too, he said. And I'm terrified that loving you is going to get you hurt. Everything worth doing is terrifying. That's how you know it matters. They sat together while rain fell on Milan, and somewhere across the city, Luciano Morelli finalized territory transfers, and Alessandro Russo compiled intelligence files, and 43 people who'd chosen different paths tried to figure out what came next. The empire Roman had built wasn't gone, but it was changing. Transforming from something built on control and calculation into something he didn't fully understand yet. Something that prioritized people over profit, communication over violence, growth over winning. It would be messy, people would leave, mistakes would happen. Some days Roman would revert to old patterns and have to consciously choose different paths. But sitting there with Serafina in her small apartment, Roman Vescari, Mafia king, architect of shadows, man who'd spent 15 years becoming someone he no longer wanted to be, finally understood what it meant to build instead of just conquer. 3 months later, on a cold November evening, Roman stood beside the Navigli canals watching lights reflect off the water while Serafina walked next to him, her hand warm in his. They'd spent the afternoon at a gallery opening, one of Serafina's artists finally getting recognition from collectors who'd previously ignored him. Roman had bought 2 pieces, not for strategic reasons or to launder money, but because they were genuinely good and he wanted to support work he believed in. The organization was different now, smaller, more focused. They'd completed the first round of territory transfers to Luciano and initiated monthly communication sessions where both organizations discussed operations with actual transparency instead of coded threats. 4 more people had left over the past months. 2 had been hired by competitors. 2 had retired completely. The ones who stayed were learning to operate differently, making decisions based on sustainable growth instead of constant expansion. It was working, slowly, imperfectly, but working. Alessandro had disappeared with his new identity. Roman occasionally got reports about a businessman in Argentina who looked suspiciously familiar, but he never followed up. Some doors were better left closed. Roman stopped suddenly in the middle of the crowded sidewalk. Serafina turned toward him. "What?" "I want to marry you," Roman said. The words came out abrupt and graceless, without calculation or performance. Just truth. Serafina stared at him. "What?" "I want to marry you. Not strategically. Not because it serves some operational purpose. Just because you make me feel like maybe I'm worth saving and I want to spend my life trying to be someone worthy of that belief." "Roman, I know it's sudden. I know I'm probably doing this completely wrong, but I love you and I'm tired of calculating everything. So I'm just asking, will you marry me?" Serafina looked at him for a long moment while people flowed around them on the sidewalk. The tattoos crawling up his throat caught the canal lights. The storm-gray eyes that had terrified men looked completely vulnerable. Then she smiled. "You don't even have a ring." "I'll get you a ring. 20 rings. Whatever you want." "I don't need 20 rings, you ridiculous man. I just need you." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." Roman pulled her close and kissed her while tourists took photos and locals walked past, and Milan hummed around them with indifferent beauty. When they broke apart, Serafina was laughing. "We're going to be terrible at this." "At what?" "Normal life, marriage, being people instead of just surviving." "Probably, but we'll figure it out together." They walked home through Milan's streets while autumn air carried the smell of roasting chestnuts and coffee and possibility. Roman's phone buzzed. Text from Dante. "Emergency at the Lambrate facility. Need you to make a call." Roman looked at the message, then at Serafina. "Work?" she asked. "Yeah." "Go. Do what you need to do. I'll be at home when you're finished." Roman kissed her once more, then called Dante while Serafina continued toward her apartment. "What's the situation?" Roman asked. "Property dispute with the neighbors. They're threatening to file complaints about noise violations. Could trigger inspections we can't afford. So talk to them. Find out what they actually want. Noise barriers, reduced operating hours, compensation, whatever makes them comfortable without compromising operations. You want me to negotiate instead of pressuring them? I want you to solve the problem through communication instead of intimidation. That's how we operate now." Silence stretched across the line. "Understood," Dante said finally. "I'll handle it." "Thank you." Roman disconnected and stood there in the Milan evening feeling like he'd just passed some kind of test he hadn't known he was taking. For 15 years, his first instinct had been control through force. Now it was communication through honesty. He wasn't perfect at it. Some days he reverted to old patterns. Some days the weight of change felt overwhelming. But he kept trying, kept choosing growth over winning, kept building instead of just conquering. And slowly, impossibly, the man he'd spent 15 years becoming started transforming into someone he might actually recognize in the mirror. Roman walked back to Serafina's apartment where warm light spilled through her window, and she was probably already making tea and setting out the cookies she pretended not to buy specifically for him. He climbed the stairs feeling lighter than he had in years, unlocked the door with the key she'd given him 2 months ago. Found her in the kitchen exactly as he'd imagined, tea steaming on the counter, cookies on a plate, wearing his old shirt and a smile that made everything else fade into background noise. "How'd it go?" she asked. "Dante's handling it through communication instead of intimidation. Look at you, delegating and choosing nonviolent solutions. Very grown up." "I'm trying." "I know." Serafina handed him tea. "And you're succeeding more than you think." They moved to the couch, and Roman pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo mixed with tea and the ordinary comfort of being home. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For making me believe I could be something other than the empire I built. For not giving up when I documented you as a vulnerability instead of just loving you. For teaching me that control doesn't equal safety and that being human isn't weakness." Serafina kissed his jaw. "You did the hard part. I just reminded you it was possible." They sat together while Milan hummed outside the windows and rain started falling again, and somewhere in the machinery of the city, life continued with all its beautiful ordinary complexity. Roman Vescari, former king of shadows, man who'd built an empire from calculated violence, someone still learning how to be human, finally understood what home felt like. Not a penthouse overlooking the city, not an organization built from fear and discipline, just this. Serafina's small apartment, tea and cookies, rain on the windows. The simple, profound intimacy of being seen completely and choosing to stay. He'd spent 15 years believing love was possession, but Serafina had taught him the truth. Love was permission. Permission to be flawed, permission to change, permission to fail and try again, permission to be human instead of just surviving. And for the first time in his life, Roman Viscari gave himself that permission. The empire would continue, smaller, different, built on new foundations. But the man running it was finally learning to be something more than just the violence he'd committed. He was learning to be someone worth loving. And that, Roman thought, as Serafina curled against him in the warm comfort of her apartment while Milan dreamed outside, was worth more than any territory he'd ever conquered.